Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started.
This is episode 33 of Changing the Face of Yoga. And I'm talking to Leslie Kazadi, and we're talking about restorative yoga and what that definition is and how it helps her students. Let's listen.
Hello, my guest today is Leslie Kazadi. She's from California in the States. She's a certified yoga therapist with IAYT, and she's an experienced 500 level yoga teacher. And I'm very impressed with the experience. That's a lot of hours of teaching. She teaches public classes and she has private yoga therapy clients. Today, Leslie and I are going to talk about restorative yoga, which is good because, quite frankly, I'm a bit confused about it because it seems to be a term that's thrown around a lot. Leslie, is there anything else you'd like to add to your introduction?
I lead a 300-hour training that is an advanced Yoga Alliance training, and I also teach workshops locally and all over the world on many subjects, but all are related to the therapeutic benefits of yoga.
Okay, great. Do you have one of those coming up anytime soon?
So the next one that I have coming up, I'm excited because it's local, and that just makes it way nicer for me. And I am doing, it's a 2-part, 50-hour restorative yoga training. So 2 intense, it's so funny to have restoratives be intense. It's 2 25-hour weekends coming up at Light on Lotus in December.
Well, then we can go right into, can you just give me a definition of restorative yoga? And is it or is it not different from gentle yoga? Because that's the thing that confuses me.
Yeah, and I think that yoga is, we all have our own names for everything, and even what's a gentle yoga or a level 1 yoga or a level 2, 3 class or whatever the designation is, it's still highly individual according to the teacher, right? So you can go to one gentle class and they're going to be 100% on the mat, lying down, doing just gentle movements, supine. And then you may have somebody else, gentle yoga means doing vinyasas slowly. It's so highly variable. And restorative is really, it's sort of like hatha yoga or something. I think it's a blanket term, and in the Iyengar system that would mean long holds, but not necessarily passive. Like you might be doing a chair back bend for 5 minutes, and it might actually be very effortful. And there's yin yoga, which is another version of restorative yoga. It's no props, it's long holds, completely relaxing into gravity. The way that I teach restorative is using a lot of props, and rather than it being about stretching, even though that will happen, that it's more about relaxation and the relaxation response. And so I think that all restorative yoga is designed to evoke the relaxation response and get us into more of a rest and repair mode in our nervous systems. And people do that different ways. Like some people really feel like, yin yoga gets them into a deep relaxation state. Some people feel like Ashtanga gets them into a deep relaxation state. But I would say that when people think of restorative yoga, they think of something that is going to be long holds, whether it's supported or like in yin, they tend to not be supported, but it's long holds, so that it's time and gravity and attention that allow us to relax.
When you say relaxed, is that comparable to going into the parasympathetic mode, where, as opposed to the sympathetic nervous system?
Right, and so that's what's interesting is, the relaxation response is, there are two elements that evoke the relaxation response, and it is attention to a rhythmic device. So maybe that's the breath, maybe that's even a movement, and the hard part, non-attachment to intrusive thoughts, just letting things be as they are, and which is really, that's the same thing as the meditative mind. It's the same, can you pay attention and not be attached? And so when you get people into postures where there's a lot of support and the physical body can relax, then it's easier for the mind to pay attention and to not get hooked. And in active practice, we're also, invoking the sympathetic nervous system, and even the stretch response and the things that feel good and the dopamine that we get from like moving or intense stretches. It's not the relaxation response. It's not parasympathetic. That's, when you're excited and happy, that's sympathetic response.
When you're teaching, I assume, because you said that you are the prop wizard, which I really love that term. You're obviously using a lot of props to help people really relax. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. People get into a pose, and not all poses, it's not, 100% relaxing. So like if you're in a back bend, you're gonna need some amount of effort to resist gravity so that you don't get into compression, especially in the lower back. Most poses, you can get enough support so that people can really be at ease. So maybe not 100% no effort, but in that sort of, sthira sukha, easeful place. And often that means getting props underneath you so that there's no space between the body and the floor. And so, for example, like in a supine twist where maybe you have tension in the lower back, if you just sort of mold a blanket up behind the spine, then people soften. If you have, a shoulder that's hanging up in the air and, people are like, no, but this is, it should open, it needs to stretch. But if you get something underneath it, then they actually open more, because then they let go of the resistance that the body is just doing automatically as a safety device. So sometimes it's moving people into a different shape, and sometimes it's getting props to support people in the shape that they're in. So you're just looking for the places where attention is being held to get either enough support or a shift in position so that tension over time will dissipate.
When you see pictures of restorative yoga, and we all should know not to pay a whole lot of attention to yoga pictures because they tend to be,
right.
Yeah, but they're all
aspirational.
Yeah, very. That they're all laying on, blankets and bolsters, and they have iPads I probably shouldn't say. Yeah, eye pillows. That's it. And yet you're telling
Apple,
me that
you'll get in trouble with Apple.
I will. I'll probably get a letter from their legal group.
Yes.
Even though it was EYE, I might add.
Right.
Yes, but you're actually saying you're doing back bends, and you're doing and twist, and you're doing. It sounds almost like a version of a typical class, shall we say, with lots of different kinds of poses. And that's, well, like I said, I don't quite know what restorative is, so I'm glad I've asked. But are you saying that you really do provide several different kinds of poses, not just laying around on the floor?
A restorative version of a back bend would be, having either a block underneath the sacrum and underneath the knees and underneath the heels, with the feet reaching into a wall, right? So like an extended bridge, or you can do all kinds of poses, back bends, forward folds, twists. In most classes, pretty much you're on your back most of the time. You're on your back or on your belly. Sometimes if you have students who really want more movement, or people who are very strong and very open can be relaxed in a downward dog with the hands wider and a block under the forehead and the feet wide and something under the heels. Like any sort of a class, if you had someone who was injured or had chronic fatigue, then a restorative practice for that person would be very small ranges of motion with lots of props and long holds. If you had a class of advanced asana practitioners, and I don't mean advanced yogis, I mean advanced asana, meaning difficult poses, then what would be restorative for them might be chair back bends and chair shoulder stand and seated forward folds. So it's like any class, there are going to be levels of what's appropriate in terms of the difficulty of the pose and also the spectrum of movement that's relaxing for a person. Someone who's very open, I can be in full Supta Virasana, no props, no strain, totally relaxed. That's not quote unquote normal. I would never do that in a class because like that's just, so it's just sort of like what I do at home in my own practice because that feels good to me. That's not going to be relaxing to very many people. So when I teach classes, you sort of go with like everything, what's going to be the most clearly accessible to the most people in the room. But definitely there's a whole range of poses because even if you don't move well or you don't move a lot, you want to have an invitation of what is possible to open and to soften into. I was in a motorcycle accident and my everything looked really different. Even my version of restorative was very different because it didn't take very much for me to feel like, yeah, that's enough. And after this point, I go into tension. I had a hysterectomy after that, like standing vertically was a back bend,
Yeah.
And so, it changes a lot, but you do want to be in like whatever a version of a back bend is for a person that they feel like they're getting some opening and some softening in the front body.
What's the end goal? Is it the end goal is to feel that softening no matter what pose got you there because it's dependent upon your body? Is that true, or are there other goals that you're trying to achieve?
So for sure the goal is the relaxation response, and also the goal is embodiment. Many of us are not living in our bodies and we're not even aware of the sensations in our bodies, or we're turned off to the ones that like, that place is tense, so I'm just like not even gonna pay attention to that. And most of the languaging that I use is coming to your senses, body scan of what do you feel, even if you don't even know what it is, but can you feel something? And so often students in active classes, like they're not sure if it's stretching or if it's working, they just know they're feeling something. We're so estranged from our inner sensory experience, and I think it's sort of like afraid to check in with ourselves. If you can get people in a place that it feels really open and easy, where they're not getting big experiences so they can listen because the voices aren't really loud, and we can get people to tune into more subtle sensations so that we become aware, not just in our bodies, but if I become aware that, oh, my breathing just changed, I'm stressed, I'm feeling a little bit of discomfort, maybe I need to attend to that. Rather than, I don't even know what's wrong with me until it's serious. Mm-hmm. Like, can we become connoisseurs of our inner experience so that we have more choice about what's happening in our bodies, but also our nervous system is telling us how are we reacting to the world, and can we pause and respond more skillfully because we're more in tune with how we're really feeling.
That's an aspect of restorative yoga that I never knew about. I think that's really interesting because comparing it to, and I do realize that people come to that point from different modes, shall we say, but really focusing on what you're feeling and not putting any terminology on it is really kind of the essence of yoga, isn't it? Just to really begin to know your body so that you can then bring it along to union with your mind and your spirit. That what you're trying to do is get people to pay attention to their bodies. And I agree. I know you say you teach seniors, I teach seniors. Sometimes I think because they have lived with something for so long that they no longer pay any attention to it. And, getting them to think about it in a different way sometimes is really helpful because it's terrible to live with pain all the time or discomfort or whatever you'd like to call it. So I think that's a beautiful thought.
And seniors especially just live with pain as if it's a normal part of their experience and are so disempowered around their bodies. And so, I mean, good Lord, find me a woman who's not ashamed of her body. And then you add age to it. We're supposed to be young and beautiful and eat pizza and drink beer.
And don't exercise.
So I think, and I know a lot for seniors, because our senses diminish, and so then it can sort of go one of two ways. People tend to either really reach their senses outward. In other words, they're trying to hear, they're trying to see, and so there's like all of this external effort to pay attention to what's going on, or they just check out because they get overwhelmed and we lose our capacity to filter distractions, and so we're just distracted and spacey, and so I think taking some of that outward focus and drawing it inward. A private student who was saying to me just last week, like, no, I don't feel that, and no, I can't feel this, and no, I've never ever paid attention. He's like super, super smart and very fast in his mind, and all of his attention is into creating things and visual, and he's in the movie business, and so it's all about visual and external, and now he's at a place where like his body's hurting, and trying to get him to make changes. He's like, yeah, but I don't feel that. I don't feel anything. I've never felt anything. I've never needed to feel anything. I don't want to feel anything. It's like that. But it's also this real awakening of, oh, if I check in and I start to feel these things, then I have a choice. But it's like just feeling your feet on the floor. And really all yoga is designed to enliven your sensory experience. So often it's either moving too fast or it's struggling in some way to be in a pose or to hold a pose or something. And so in restorative, you sort of take all of the challenges out, the challenges of moving fast, the challenges of trying to reach for some end goal, the challenge of trying to hold yourself up, and the challenge of discomfort in the body, so that it's just a more inviting place to look at. But I agree. I think it's a challenge also to pay attention to your body if you've been ignoring it as your way of not addressing whatever issue it might be. Yeah, well, that's a really interesting way to look at it. I really hadn't thought about that. So I'm glad we're having this talk. I like to learn new things. You say that you have, I love this, that you have older clients in your yoga therapy and you deal with structural situations. Could you give me an example of what a structural situation is? So I use the word situation because it just doesn't sound as intransigent. And so I did a workshop called Problems and Solutions. And then I just really hated that word problem because I think we get it has such a people feel ashamed of having problems. And I think that situation just doesn't sound so permanent. And I think it's just sort of a non-triggering word, where problem is, I just think, a heavier word to use. So a structural situation just means a structural imbalance, and it might be an injury, but your situation is not your truth, and people can get really into, well, I have this bad need. It's always a problem. And so it's just a way of choosing language that softens or shifts kind of our lens of how we think of it.
I've noticed that you're very careful with your language. I read one of your blogs, and I think you said something about move something a smidge or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. And somebody else said, is that English? And but
and he was a foreign student, so it was
really?
very funny. Yeah. And
he was trying to figure out if he should know that word.
Yeah, no, he was actually, he's lovely. He was being very sincere. Like, he wasn't like being a smart ass or calling me out on my careless language. He was like, is that a word? And what does that word mean? And like a squiggle. And I'm like, like a line like that, like with my hand, like a sort of essy, squiggly line. And he's like, oh, okay. But he literally didn't understand. And so, I feel like if you're communicating specifically, it doesn't matter what the words are. It's just like, are you communicating? And sometimes, we all have our language that we use again and again that our students know, but then the new student is like, wait, what? I don't know what, what are some of the, they have some very specific phrases in Iyengar, like the eyes of the armpits, or things that if you said anywhere else in the world, people are like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes.
Where, we talk about the shoulder heads, and that's not an anatomical word. You can't Google that and find anything. But if you are in yoga, then that means the head of the humerus, but you just have to define your terms, right?
Yeah. But language is really important, isn't it? Yeah, all the technical terms or non-technical terms, however we'd like to define them. But actually, the way that we talk to in a class, I was taught, especially working with seniors, to invite people to do things, not to tell them to do things. I think the longer I've taught, the more I'm considering that language is extremely important in a class. And I've noticed that you're very careful with your language about not that people feel pain or not that they have a problem, but that they have a situation, because it sounds less, but it doesn't sound as serious. It doesn't sound as permanent. Maybe that's the word.
It sounds, more open to change.
So really our language in a class is critically important. What is your feeling about using Sanskrit in classes?
Well, first of all, because I teach older adults, and for one thing, a lot of the poses that I teach are not even poses, so I don't use it at all. I'm trying to think if that's true. I teach teachers, and so I use the Sanskrit with teachers, and I think it's something that you should know as a teacher, because I don't think that your students should know more than you about these things. But there's some basic ones, like I do find that I say Tadasana, but I'll repeat that this is what this, I'll define it. But, I'm going to say Warrior One, or I'm going to say Restorative Bridge, or I'm going to, I don't have a population that's interested in that. And sometimes it's fun to say a word and, like I would say pranayama and what that means, just as a sort of linking to the lineage. But I definitely don't with poses, unless I'm in a training or unless I'm teaching, when I know teachers are in the room and they want that. Those are just not my people. I do teach a huge array of levels of experience, so it depends. But like if you were just going to come to a regular class of mine, and certainly my privates are like, not at all. That's just not who they are. And to the extent that now, when it comes to poses, I'm like, oh, what? I used to know all of them, and that used to be really important. When I was a new teacher and I wanted to be a good student, and now I'm like, if it's not basic poses, like the arm balances and things like that, I'm like, I'm not really sure. Because I go to those classes and they say it, I'm like, I'm not sure which one that is anymore. I'm in menopause. I can't remember things.
Okay.
Like, it's hard enough. Can we just speak English?
Yes. Just
because we also don't want to engage so much the thinking mind. That's the thing, is if we're trying to get people into the sensory part of their brain, then the less you get people in their thinking minds, the more access they have to sensation. That's just science.
One of the reasons I don't is so many of my people can't hear. So giving them a completely foreign language, that has very little to do with English, I think is just very confusing if they're trying to hear and then they're getting all of these strange names. Sanskrit isn't even used in India. So why do you think that? Is it just the historical component that every training I've had, they've used the Sanskrit names, and I'm like you, I don't use them, so I've forgotten what a lot of them are. Why do you think that is part of it?
Well, I think, the sutras are in Sanskrit, and I will refer to the sutras again in trainings, but not, the way that I infuse classes with philosophy is not that direct. But I do think, we learn the sutras as a sort of Bible of yoga, and those are in Sanskrit. And I think it does help to connect to some tradition and lineage. And I know people who are strong advocates of Sanskrit. Good Lord, I took a course on, Devanagari, how to write in, it's beautiful, the way that you write Sanskrit, which is, it was a little course, and I realized, because I closed captioned the news for a long time, just basically learning how to, it's kind of learning a new language. You're translating it into phonetics on a machine, and to learn a language and to be able to so that part of my brain works really well. But I took this little Devanagari course, and I was like, oh, this is going to take 4 years to really know how to do this.
Yeah.
And people who are Sanskrit scholars, it's years and years. Because I don't want to dedicate that sort of time to it, people will say, well, pranayama is the expansion of the breath. No, it's the control of the breath, and have those little, I'm like, it's kind of both. Yeah, for me, it just doesn't hold my interest. And I think a lot of things that held my interest when I was starting, you just go, oh yeah, that's not really it. That's not really what it's about. Learning all the alignment, which is I think really important, but it's also not really what it's about. And so, the longer you practice, the longer you teach, you're like, yeah, really good that I learned that. I can let that go now. And I think Sanskrit is one of those things that when I was a new teacher, it was really impressed upon me that was very important. And, to pronounce it correctly, and that just doesn't resonate with me. And it's certainly, my students are like, I'm happy that I can remember figure 4. Because I think, we give things names because it makes it easier for people to drop in. If you say tree pose and people know what it is, they don't have to think so much.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't think we spend all of our days thinking and thinking and thinking. And if we can turn that off, I don't know how you do that with adding a foreign language.
Yeah.
Unless you've got super sophisticated students and they need something to chew on. Those just aren't my people.
No, those aren't the people I teach either. But I'm not saying that that's the only way to go. Leslie, this has been great. I've really learned a lot. I like your take on restorative yoga. I hadn't ever really thought about it that way, especially trying to get into the non-thinking part of the brain so that we actually allow room and time for sensations and to pay attention to our body, which is great. I'm going to give some contact details so people can get a hold of you if they want to. But is there anything that you would like to add before I do that?
Gosh, I don't know.
Caught you out there, did I? Okay, I'll give some contact details,
Yeah.
and if you think of anything, then we'll we'll add that in, okay? Leslie's email address is leslie.kazadi, and that's Kazadi @gmail.com. Her website is www.lesliekazadi.com. Her Twitter is @LeslieLovesYoga. And her Instagram is Leslie Loves Yoga. And her Facebook is Leslie Kazadi Yoga Therapy. Any of those should probably, you can see what Leslie has to say, and possibly if you'd like to contact her. Leslie, anything you've thought of that you would like to say?
I do have online classes.
Okay.
At yogisanonymous.com, and I've got restorative and senior. I got all kinds of classes there.
Okay. And it's where? Yogis Anonymous?
It's called Yogis Anonymous, and it's an online. You just go to yogisanonymous.com.
Okay. And they can look for your name,
Just
and that's the way they'd find it?
Yep.
Okay, great. You could also go to yogisanonymous.com and look for Leslie's name. That's Leslie Kazadi, and she has some classes that you may be interested in that we've talked about, restorative and seniors. Thank you, Leslie. It's been a great interview. I've learned a lot. I always like interviews where I learn a lot. And I do think it's interesting to talk about the language that we use or don't use. Thanks again.
Thanks. What a fun job you have.
I know, I love it. I really do. This is the best stuff, just to talk to all these great teachers all over the world, and they get to tell me what their passion is, and it's great. One of the best things I've done in a long time. Thank you for that wonderful interview. If you would like to be a guest on Changing the Face of Yoga, please go to my website, www.yogalightness.com.au, and under the Changing the Face of Yoga tab, you can complete Be Our Guest form. After reviewing the form and finding it applicable to this podcast, we will send you a link to schedule an interview. Please download, review, and tell your friends of any podcasts that are of interest to you and to them. If you would like to contact me, send an email to info@yogalightness.com.au. And thank you for listening to Changing the Face of Yoga.